You are watching Notepad. I'm your host Ibrahim Sani. Today we continue our adventure on innovation and on tech, because very recently the Science Ministry has announced a few initiatives. One of them is of course NRS, the National Regulatory Sandbox. We got Futurise from Cyberjaya right now in the studio with us, because Futurise has been given the mandate by the government to drive the NRS, or the National Regulatory Sandbox, which is an initiative to explore what they call an innovation-friendly regulatory approaches. This is of course different from the NTIS, the National Technology and Innovation Sandbox. So as you can see, we got already two alphabets that we got to untangle: the NTIS, the NRS. So joining us of course is Mahadhir Aziz, the CEO of Futurise, here to help us understand a little bit better about the objectives of these two things, and perhaps try to understand a little bit more about how the other elements such as MDEC and Magic and everything else in between comes into the picture. So Mahadhir, thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.
Now before we jump into all that, let's understand about what Futurise is, how do you operate, who funds you, who's your boss, basically all that.
Okay. Well, Futurise is a company that is owned by the Ministry of Finance. We are a subsidiary of a bigger company, which is very much focusing on property development within the localities of Cyberjaya, called Cyberview. As we develop this, the mandate that was given to Cyberview first, and I'll start with that, is very much to develop Cyberjaya in order for it to be able to support multinationals, Malaysian companies, and also regional companies as well. But over the years, as we developed that, we noticed that we needed more than just talents, infrastructure, and just funding. There are other things that we need to build, and we are very much nationalistic at heart. So we want to be able to look at Malaysian companies. How do we start to create? How do we start to export and things like that? So eventually, that particular division that I was running was formed into a company as we call Futurise, to focus more on this and less on property. So that's where we come in. And how we are funded is very much through the Ministry of Finance. There was a grant that was announced back in 2017, May 2017, to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Cyberjaya then. With a mandate to look at how do we bring Malaysian companies up, how do we bring Malaysian companies to absorb the IR4, how do we look at what the future economy looks like, and how do we prepare ourselves with the things that we need to be able to compete. So that's a very big aspiration there.
That would mean you are at the mercy of the Minister of Finance in terms of budget allocation. So for instance, the budget announcement that will happen in November, if there is no budget for you guys, that's it.
Well, the thing about this is that we have been given a grant upfront that lasts for 10 years at the very least.
So there's some continuity there.
Exactly. So there's some forward thinking in terms of how to sustain this, and for us to be able to look at proving ourselves over time, what we can do and what we can do with the mandate.
Okay. So what are your targets? When you say proving yourself?
We have three things that we look at. One would be what we call the intervention, regulatory intervention. And this is where the program called the National Regulatory Sandbox, which I'll get to that in a bit. The next thing is the deployment of innovation, because you mentioned earlier on about innovation-friendly regulatory approaches. So we have to look at the intervention that allows for more innovation to get to market. And the third thing is very much creation of new ecosystems, i.e. creation of new jobs, creation of different kinds of services and products that we can look at and we can export.
Okay, so how do you measure those achievements?
In terms of numbers?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you can measure innovation, for instance. It's so crazy.
Deployments, exactly. Say, for example, if I can just make use of one example that we have done is very much on drones. Futurise, like it or not, is synonymous with drones, but we're not a drone company per se. So what happened was that we, back in 2018, when we did a public consultation with the industry, with the regulators themselves, was that we're looking at a technology that allows for unmanned aerial vehicles or platforms. And there's a bunch of Malaysian companies who have been doing services based on that. some hobbyists taking wedding photos, events and things like that, and some are more serious that goes into asset management, surveillance and things like that.
Like Aerodyne, for instance.
Aerodyne, for example. And we met them then back in 2018. So we saw that the services are here, but on the regulation side, it is restrictive in terms of the number of agencies that they have to clear and get permission from, license, permits and so on. And second, there's a limit to what they can do within that. So what we did is bring everyone together, look at what would be the best guideline, a middle ground for the government, first and foremost, to understand, to be able to monitor and enforce certain laws onto this, and then for the company to be able to still grow, provide the services, no less than what they can do outside of Malaysia, and be able to prosper within that. So that is one case that we consider as an intervention. And the deployments right now, we have done it twice. One in Cyberjaya itself, where we established the drone testing zone within 1 kilometer radius of Futurise itself. And then we are working on another one down south in Medini.
Okay.
So that would be 2 innovation deployments.
Okay, so these are the methods you can measure your targets. Are you being overlooked by somebody else? Is there an audit element here in terms of how you perform?
Oh yes, very much so. From a company's perspective, in terms of performance, how we spend the funds and everything, we have Cyberview reporting on monthly basis to Ministry of Finance in terms of our utilization of the grant and how we spend and so on. Second part, on the KPIs and all this, we have a proper governance that goes all the way up to the Prime Minister himself. When the National Regulatory Sandbox program and initiative was launched in February 2018, the governance is to report to the Chief Secretary of Malaysia, KSN, and also a council, National Regulatory Sandbox Council, chaired by the Prime Minister then. So again, over the years, the change of government and things like that, we found ourselves having to inform the sitting government, number one, on the existing program, and also the governance that would have happened.
Okay.
And I think the recent changes would also be affected on how we do things moving forward.
So how are you different or the same, I guess, in terms of what people normally know, which is MDAC and Magic and all the other stuff?
I think we are more complementary, and this is extremely important when we came into existence. The decision to create Futurise as an organization was very much cognizant of what is available out there. If we look at Magic, which has been around since for about 4 years by then, was very much about the supply, the building, the training of entrepreneurs. I mean, the big tagline that you see in front of the office is building great entrepreneurs. And this is what they are doing. They are training people who can develop ideas, who can translate ideas into products and services, who can actually pitch for funds and so on. And they are extremely good at that. On the other hand, you have MDAC, traditionally has been looking at, before this, multimedia, and after that, more on digital economy. Again, from a company point of view, either you invite them to come into Malaysia, the FDIs, or through some programs like GAIN and any market access programs to export what Malaysian companies can do and have done. So if you look at that, it's a progression from entrepreneurs, startups up to maybe 5 years old before they become tech SMEs or technopreneurs and all that, and then they export. So these are the areas that Magic and MDAC would play on top of the other funding agencies, Cradle and things like that. But again, the questions, 2 questions that came to my mind, and I did question MOF and also the other ministries and CEOs then, was that we are training people, we are providing the supply, but we are not creating the jobs. Meaning these people would have to find projects to do in Malaysia itself. Otherwise, they go to other countries. As we all know, some of the Malaysian companies who have gone overseas and set up businesses over there. So we need to retain them here. We need them to call Malaysia their home and their HQ. So creation of projects. So this is where Cyberview and also Futurise looks at those areas. We are working with agencies, governments as well, to look at what sort of physical projects that they can do.
Have you done any of this job creation projects?
Yes, we did it with a company called ATLZ then, and together with TM, to look at smart traffic light system within Cyberjaya. There was a proof of concept and a pilot that tested the technology of visual analytics that looks at artificial intelligence and also IoT devices. So that was piloted within Cyberjaya, only a stretch of about 4 kilometers, and exported to Johor. So that's where the big things are. So the way we look at this, Cyberjaya would be one big city where you can test a lot of things, but not everything, obviously.
Yeah, but that was always the intention of creating Cyberjaya to be the test
That's
bed.
right.
Yeah.
But the argument that we had is that nobody is following up on that. It's more about bringing companies into Cyberjaya or in Malaysia in other corridors that we're looking at, but for the sake of having them there, rather than using the place and utilizing not just the talents to do the
What
business.
has been the reception in terms of your job creation projects and stuff like this?
I think it has been positive. Granted, there has been confusion in terms of what we are doing and what others are doing. So we needed to provide more clarity, and I think platforms like this would be welcome in any way to be able to look at that. And we have many, I would say, discussions and also platforms at the national level and state level to ensure that they understand how to approach us and where to go after this.
Okay.
So that the second part is, again, innovations would have impediments in terms of regulations as well. So we can create the best product in the world if the regulations are not allowing that to happen. Again, I'll use drones in this case. We have Malaysian companies who had businesses in more than 28 countries outside, HQ in Malaysia, but not having much in Malaysia.
Yeah, but that's the thing, Mahadhir. I'm sorry, I have to disagree with you on this one. If you want innovation to happen, you must not have any regulation. That's how innovation happens.
Well, that's why I think the term sandbox was created, because it created a safe zone where you can try not just technology, but you can also try and test what would be the guideline. You can create one set of guidelines for you to test it out and then adjust that accordingly, all within that safe area or sandbox.
Government is good at regulating and governing, but not innovating.
No.
We're in the crossroad where we are asking innovators to talk to government people.
They would have to come and talk to us. That's why I think that's where we come as the intermediary to the government. It's hard to get somebody, especially regulators, to admit that, okay, my act or my guideline is not good enough.
It will never be good enough because we're creating something new.
Yeah. So now we are saying that it can be created but mediated. I think that would be the best way to
mediated.
Yeah.
And okay, so let's talk about the sandbox per se before we jump to all the other alphabet soup. This mediating role that we agreed upon using this particular vocab, do you feel that it has a potential to succeed in terms of allowing innovation to flourish within that element of regulating and observing and creating guidelines and perhaps even laws later on in the future?
Okay. I think it has shown results. We have looked at Civil Aviation Authority of Malaysia, who have been progressive in terms of looking and considering what has happened out there and adopting that as a Malaysian civil aviation regulation. The first draft allows for a bit more loose and a bit more receptive, I think, guidelines for this. And it is still being continued. In fact, I spoke to the CEO on Tuesday.
CEO of CAM?
Captain Chester. And he's been open about, I wanted to do this, let's do this together. And I think that kind of attitude and also approach to doing this should be prevalent to other industries.
Yeah, but there's a lot of critics of the Civil Aviation Authority of Malaysia.
Yeah.
A lot of critics. I mean, you can just Google why I hate CAAM and you're going to have 10 pages of Google.
Sure, and I think they're not the only one. I mean, regulators tend to be
hated. Yeah,
hated,
definitely.
But regulators who are progressive would be at the forefront to be able to sit there with you and say, let's go and discuss this. I think the whole idea about this is that they're not that bad, and the innovators are not just
No,
crazy,
nobody hates each other. But the
course.
thing here is that, you see, drone is the best example or case study actually, because when you talk about the method of how data surveillance is being done, the Civil Aviation Authority would be concerned about privacy, about security, how you interfere with other elements in the air, including helicopters and of course aircraft. Yeah, but the tussle is always ongoing, right?
Sure.
And of course the innovators are saying, no, I'm doing it this way and that way. This, in my opinion, pardon my pun, this slows down the whole innovation process.
Okay.
Innovation has to be fast, quick, and nimble. Do you think that this kind of sandbox, for instance, is going to help innovators, I guess, bring it to market?
Very much so, because I can say that because I've seen the results. That's the third part of the Futurise KPI, the ecosystems that we would have created. So the proof points that we brought to CAM and Ministry of Transportation was that then back in 2019 was that we had enough companies who are extremely interested to do this, who wants to work with you and not just complain.
Yelah.
Right. So we had one event called My Drone X back in June 2019 to bring all these companies together to sit with the regulators as an event, as opposed to a discussion where there's bashing going back and forth. We brought the academics as well. So universities have had their own hobby programs or even innovation programs specific to that, and also individuals who are, you know, hobbyists who would want to be into that. So that was a proof which then tipped CAM over the edge and said that, yeah, I think this is serious enough. I think it's high time for us to actually look at how to do things. And not just CAM, there's also the Jabatan Uku and Pemetaan Malaysia who looks at mapping, which what drones does as well. So there's more regulators, MCMC as well. So everyone banded together to actually come up with that. So I still feel, okay, this is Malaysia at its best looking at this, and we can do a lot more.
All right. We'll take a short break before continue our conversation with Futurise. Senang Berhad, don't go anywhere. You are watching Notepad. I'm your host Ibrahim Sani. I have with us Futurise CEO Mahadhir Aziz, here to explain not just the function and role of Futurise, but perhaps even the larger agenda of how Malaysia plans to innovate in a very, I suppose, controlled manner and allow for innovators to bring their products to market. The two things that I want to discuss and untangle further is the National Technology Innovation Sandbox, NTIS, with that of the National Regulatory Sandbox, the NRS. How does these two differ from one another, and how were they created in the first place?
Okay. Extremely good question. I think let's demystify that. NTIS basically came as a component out of what the National Regulatory Sandbox program that was launched in 2018.
Okay, so NRS came first, then
yes.
NTIS.
Yes.
Okay.
So within the guise of NRS, we had innovations that we would have to look at, technology that would have to be tested, provided that all the R&D activities happen outside and before they get to NRS.
Okay.
Okay. And then within that, as we identify existing laws that would have been broken through that innovation, or non-existent laws on how to govern that innovation, and that's where we look at the regulatory sandbox. So it became as one huge initiative that was run by Futurise since 2018. But I think with the change of how the government sees things and the recreation or re-establishment rather of Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, where we looked at this, and MOSTI would be the best platform to look at technology and innovation.
Okay.
So the discussion and collaboration that we've done between ourselves and also Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation was very much on how to split that particular portion out of NRS and to have the more appropriate ministry and agencies to look at that.
And how does Futurise fit into this?
We are still Secretariat of NTIS together with MAGIC, and also MIMOS and MTDC. Those two would be looking at funding and also technology maturity. So they are, I think, a much better set of eyes to do evaluation before we look at the funding all those companies that will be coming out with the technology and innovation.
So you also help with the funding?
Yes.
Not you, as in the NTIS will also help the funding?
Yes, yes. So one portion of it through MTDC fund.
Okay.
So that was launched as part of the Penjana initiative. As NTIS is announced as 100 million allocation for that. Most of it came from MTDC to fund those companies. So why we are still in there was that we need to have clarity of what's happening on the innovation and see if there's anything that we should pick up very early where we can continue with the regulatory intervention.
See, let's talk about the case study here. So I have this very brilliant idea, autonomous vehicle. I have everything that I need to do to make this car drive by itself.
Yep.
How do I get it on Malaysian roads? What would be the steps?
Okay. The typical thing that you would do is you would do your own research on the technology, which is the car and the autonomous platform that I put in the car, test it, make sure test it in car park and all that. Everything is good. So that is very much technology and innovation. You may need extra funds to do that, and that is something that you can go through and submit through NTIS.
Okay.
And say that, okay, I've got this innovation, I need to test within specific sites.
Okay.
And so they have single site sandbox funding and also multi-site sandbox funding.
Okay.
And then you're funded throughout that entire process.
Okay.
But again, at the same time, we understand that current regulations that we have does not allow for
autonomous vehicles to be on the road.
Autonomous vehicles.
Particularly when it comes to a big problem between, you know, a very real scenario. There's a group of school kids on one side, and then there's a elderly person on the other side of the road, and then there's an obstacle, and the car, because has to choose.
Yes.
It's very difficult, right?
You can test the camera and technology to say that identify this and then avoid or whatever it is.
And the law is absent.
Yes.
There's no law. So how do you regulate that kind of situation?
This is where we look at what sort of governing authorities over that particular thing, because you're bringing cars onto the road. One is modification on the cars itself, whether it's allowed or not allowed. And that needs to be tested.
Dulu spoilers. Now it's like autonomous. Spoilers
because you're
was
taking it out.
Yeah, you know, spoilers nothing. I'll just get my screwdriver and off we go.
That's right.
This is something else.
It's much bigger than that. It is something almost you plug out and plug in into this particular vehicle, and then you would have what do you call that? Insurance to look at that. You would have what do you call that? Changes, and typically, autonomous car is also synonymous with EVs, electric vehicles. So again, how do you actually look at this, and where's the engine, where's the CPU now sitting, and where the placements are and all that. So these are the authorities that you would have to be looking at before it gets onto the road. And then JPJ comes in and say, how do I put my road tax on that car? How do I actually monitor this? And then possibly, God forbid, you have accidents. You're looking at both the insurance and also the authority in PDRM to look at traffic. So these are the authorities to look at the possibilities of anything that may go wrong or anything that may happen that I need to come in.
So this decision is done at NRS?
NRS, that's right.
So
the discussions would have to.
I would imagine NRS to be filled with lawyers.
Yes, we have lawyers, but not just lawyers. We have regulators who are very fluent in terms of what acts that they are empowered.
But the nature of the legal industry is that it's based on precedent, i.e. they are based in the past. We are building the future.
Historical and all that.
How do you match the two together?
The benchmark is always other countries. Good thing about this is that there are other countries who have done it, who we can base that on, and who have been testing something like this. So autonomous vehicle, you have United States through Arizona State and all that that have done it, and not to mention Germany and Japan and things like that. But there are things, admittedly, that will be extremely new, which no one has ever done before. So we have to tackle that. We don't have all the answers at this moment. But where possible, we have to look at the benchmarks.
Okay, so the Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, YB Khairi Jamaluddin, very recently has announced that Malaysia's capability and capacity to build deep science and deep tech is no longer science fiction, it's science reality.
Yep.
How does that statement pair with the kind of work that you guys are doing? What does he mean? What does he hint when he says that, something like that?
I completely agree with him. I think capabilities of Malaysians are just out there, but we don't know how to put them together. We don't know how to actually talk about it and bring all this up. I think capabilities are just endless in Malaysia. Deep tech and deep learning and all these things are examples that YB Khairi Jamaluddin have been using, but we are not short of skills and resources in other areas as well that we have always been exporting.
Yeah.
So my argument, again, I was from Cyberview anyway. When we do, anytime that we did any investment promotions, you start comparing and benchmarking what Malaysia has to what other countries are doing as well. We still are ahead in other areas, but they just know how to sell better than we do.
Why do you say that? How are we ahead from other countries?
Well, if you look at the infrastructure and what infrastructure that our government has been putting up in terms of place to start business, funding to actually do this and all that, we still have all those things here, and there are things that other countries like the startups in Berlin, for example, sounds extremely good, but they don't have much of that over there, and it's everywhere, as opposed to in one dedicated place or in a few corridors that we have here. So I think the Malaysian companies may need some nudges to actually get into all these things. So again,
some Malaysian companies believe that government intervention is too much when it comes to the realm of science and technology and innovation.
Okay.
What's your comment on their view when they talk about something like this?
I think fair enough. In some cases as well, the intervention has to be at the correct places and the correct timing as well, through the right agencies and platforms. Today, for example, from funding, we're not short of any seed funding. You go to at least 5 to 6 agencies that can provide seed funding. But what happens after Series A and Series B? Not much happening there. For example, I'm not again commenting too much on funding, but an example that we say that okay, let's focus more funding towards that side now. Enough of this on this particular journey of being funded for these companies.
But why can't they go to the Sandhill Road guys, the Sequoia capitals of the world, make Series C something coming from the Silicon Valley area?
And I think this is one of the things that we are trying to do through possibly the recent Dana Penjana as well, where we bring in external VCs, foreign VCs, to be able to look at that. I think this is where the government is looking at, again, data, history, past events, and learning from that and adjusting based on that.
What would be some of the messages that you want to share with the public right now in them trying to be a little bit more excited in the journey of innovation?
I think, again, I would say infrastructure for something like this, and I use the word loosely, in terms of places, in terms of incentives, in terms of the skill sets, are all available there. What you need is that belief that it can be done, it will be done through all this maze of agencies. We just have to, the government would have to play its role to, again, demystify and clarify. This is where you go to do this. So there's a lot of consolidation that may happen, I foresee. There's a lot of clear distinction of and demarcation of mandates so that each can play its own role cohesively to develop something like that.
Will COVID change the way you do things?
Definitely. COVID will create many things, many jobs, many innovation that is required. We have not seen everything yet, and we have not recognized that. As we slowly ease ourselves into the new norm, I think there's a lot more that we discover. We may not need this, but we need something else, for example. And I think this is where those companies would not have to depend, okay, government, please tell me what is the big project so that I can bid for it. It doesn't work like that. Think of new ideas, come up with that, and then let's propose something like this.
Fantastic. That was my conversation with Futurise CEO Mahadhir Aziz. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astroawani.com, look for Notepad. Plenty of interviews like this can be found there. Also, you can watch this interview on your mobile devices. Just download the Astro AWANI app wherever you get the application. Till then, thanks very much for watching and goodbye.